Erev Tov, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Thursday night Parashat HaShavua class. I'm glad you can join me here tonight live or on our podcast, findingholiness.buzzsprout.com, where you can catch all the shiurim. So if you're hearing this recorded, Hazak Baruch. If you're here live, Kol HaKavod. Tonight's shiur is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Yossi and Lana Shemesh in memory of his father, Mr. Reuven Shemesh Zichrono Livracha, and as well by Mr. and Mrs. John Claude and Brian Aptan in memory of her cousin, Israel ben Reuven Zichrono Livracha. May the words of Torah that we say tonight bring an aliyah to their respective neshamot. Tihi nafsham tzrura bitzror hachaim. I would also like to mention that next week our synagogue is commemorating and celebrating our annual fundraiser, that of the Hilulah Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Last year, unfortunately, due to the sudden impact of COVID, we weren't able to conduct that fundraiser, but we are back at it again this year, obviously virtually, and we will try to make it as best as we can, filled with song, divrei Torah, of course, auctions and items. Please, if you have an opportunity, check out what we have to offer at the newly built website, kehilastore.com. That's kehilastore.com, where you can see all the items there to purchase in memory or in honor of a loved one that will be auctioned off. There's also some things that you can buy it now for that purpose. So check it out. I urge everyone, if you enjoy what you hear weekly during our shiurim that we offer, if you enjoy the services that we have throughout the week and on Shabbat, if you enjoy the things that we provide for you, then please reach into your pockets, dig down deep in your hearts, and help us continue the wonderful things that we do by supporting our synagogue for our annual Hilulah Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That will take place, by the way, next Thursday night. So everyone is welcome to log in as well, and a link will be sent out, Bezrat Hashem. Tonight we are studying a double parasha, indeed yet another double parasha, that of Acharei Mot Kedoshim, a double Torah portion. And it's fitting that we probably explore a vital mitzvah. There are so many unbelievable mitzvot found in Parashat Kedoshim that in and of itself can take many shiurim to go through. But the mitzvah that is very pertinent to the days of Sefirat HaOmer, namely the positive commandment of Ve'ahavta lereacha kamocha, which is you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And of course, let us not forget what Rashi brings down in this pasuk in his commentary, following the words of the Midrash, in the name of Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Ze klal gadol b'Torah. This is a fundamental principle in the Torah. So before we expand on that, it's hard to imagine one of the most difficult mitzvot to observe. What does the mitzvah of loving our fellow man just like ourselves entail? What does it require us? According to the Ramban, this seems to be impossible. The Torah does not demand of a Jew to love others with the same feeling of love that he has for himself. I love myself more than I love anybody else. That's an impossible requirement. So the Ramban says the mitzvah is to act towards a fellow Jew and in his behalf just as if we would do for ourselves. So we help him personally, we help him financially in his time of need, we do him favors, we give him good advice, we treat him and his property respectfully, considerately, we participate in his times of simcha, we also participate in times of grief and mourning, we treat him in all respects just as we would for ourselves. And in order to fulfill this mitzvah properly, says the Ramban, you have to remove all from our hearts all barriers of jealousy, all ill feelings towards our fellow Jews. And then we act for them just as we do for ourselves. Who was the best, the greatest person to fulfill this mitzvah? Loving every Jew like himself in the literal sense of the word. When the literal sense of the word has to be Moshe Rabbeinu, the great prophet Moshe, when his student Yehoshua accused two Jews of prophesizing that Moshe's death was impending, Moshe exclaimed, "Do you think I need to have my honor defended? I have only one wish, that all of Klal Yisrael should be prophets like I am." This is what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted. He wanted everybody to be like him. Be like Moshe. Be like Mike. Be like Moshe. This is exactly what he wanted. Who else do we see this? Shaul HaMelech's son, Yonatan. He could have expected to, he did expect, or maybe he did, to inherit his father's throne one day. His father was the king of Israel, the first king of Israel. Yonatan says, it's mine, it's coming up. But when he saw that Shmuel HaNavi anointed David HaMelech as the future king, it would appear natural that Yonatan should see David as a rival. He should see him as someone who he dislikes, especially since his father Shaul pursued David HaMelech. But instead, David HaMelech and Yonatan had this love, this affection for each other, and Yonatan loved David sincerely and repeatedly saved him from certain death at his father's hands. And by removing all that jealousy from David's heart, Yonatan fulfilled this mitzvah, this precept of loving someone else, your friend, like himself. And because of that, Chachamim say that Yonatan, although he relinquished his crown in this world, he gained a crown in the next world. But I want to focus on tonight this statement of Rabbi Akiva, Zeklal Gadol BaTorah, is a fundamental principle in the Torah. It takes on an added significance during the days of Sefirat HaOmer, because it was during these days, this historic period where we mourn the deaths of this Tana, Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students. The Gemara in Masechet Yevamot, Daf Samech Bet Amud Bet 62b, writes that they perished during the days of the Sfirah. Why? For not showing respect for one another. And I read you the Gemara. Amru, Shenem Asar Elef Zugim Talmidim Ayu Lo Rabbi Akiva Migebat Ad Anpitras. That 12,000 pairs of students extending from Gevat to Antiparit, Vekulan Metu Beperek Echad, and they all died during one period of time, Mipene Shelo Naagu Kavod Ze Lazeh, because they did not treat each other with respect. Ve'aya ha'olam shamem, the world was left barren of Torah. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva etzer rabotenu shebadarom v'ushnea lahem, until Rabbi Akiva came to the rabbis in the south and taught them. Who are these rabbis? Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir Balanes, whose Hilula is in a few days. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, Rabbi Yosea Galili, Rabbi Shimon, that's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. These were the 5 rabbis that he began to teach Torah after all of his 24,000 students passed away. They were the ones who upheld Torah at that time. The Tana writes, Kulam metu mi Pesach ve'ad Atzeret. All of the disciples perished between Pesach and Atzeret. Atzeret is the holiday of Shavuot. You can check out the other podcast, Finding Halacha.buzzsprout.com, where I explained why it's called Atzeret. Nevertheless, from this Gemara, it appears that Rabbi Akiva's statement of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha as a fundamental principle of the Torah was pronounced when? After the aftermath of the tragic loss of his 24,000 students. So it's during this crucial time of year where we mourn these students, it behooves us to consider the importance of this mitzvah. It appears that Rabbi Akiva's students were punished severely for failing to fulfill this mitzvah. Additionally, we need to figure out, why did they die specifically during the days of Sefirat HaOmer, between Pesach and Shavuot? So, in order to answer these questions, we need to shed some light on the subject by noticing that Rabbi Akiva's statement coincides almost perfectly with the famous words of Hillel Hanasi. Hillel and Shammai, of course, were the 2 pairs, the last of the Zugot. Hillel was the Nasi, the leader of the generation. Many of you have heard this story, but it's important to repeat it again in the context of what we're discussing with. There was an incident involving a non-Jew who presented himself to Shammai. Amar lo, he said to him, Gayereni al menat shetelamdeni kol haTorah kula. I want you please to convert me on condition that you teach me the entire Torah k'she'ani omed al regel achat, while I am standing on one foot. Dechafo be'emet be'amat habinyan beyado. What did Shammai do? He pushed him away with a long stick that he had in his hand. Get out of here. What are you wasting my time for? You're interrupting my day. You're interrupting my learning for such a stupid request. Get out of here. Ba lifnei Hillel. He comes to Hillel and he says, Giyarea, I want you to please to convert me. Amar lo, Hillel tells him, Da'alach saneh lechavrach lo ta'avid. Zohi kol haTorah kula, ve'idach pirusha hu zil gemor. Very famous statement by Hillel to this convert. Hillel actually converted him, and then he told him, that which is distasteful to you, do not do to your fellow. That is the message of the entire Torah. The rest is all explanations. Now go and learn. This was his message to this convert. This was all he had to tell him. Don't do to your friend what you don't want to be done to you. Whatever is distasteful to yourself, don't do to your fellow. The rest is just explanation. And Rashi explains that Hillel's pronouncement to this ger, what is distasteful to you, don't do to your fellow, was in reference of the mitzvah, ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. This unique, singular mitzvah is the foundation of the entire Torah in one all-encompassing brief statement. The rest of the Torah, everything else that we have, is merely an elaboration of this maxim, which needs to be explored and study. And that's the message that Rabbi Akiva was trying to tell us. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ze klal gadol b'Torah. Loving your neighbor as yourself is indeed the foundation of the entire Torah. This actually was evident when? At Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, when the Jews did accept the Torah. The Torah was not given to Israel until they stood together, united as one man with one heart. We learned it from the pasuk in Shemot, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged ha'ar, and Bnei Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. It should have said Vayachanu, they in plural. Vayachanu implies a plural tense of the verb, but it said Vayichan. And there Rashi comments in the name of the Midrash, Ke'ish echad belev echad, as one man with one heart. So we see that unity among Israel, between Jew and fellow Jew, is the foundation of the entire Torah. We still need to figure out and explain the intent of the non-Jew. Here this non-Jew comes up to Hillel and Shammai to make this odd request. Why did he ask them to teach the entire Torah while standing on one leg, al regel achad? More than that, how did Hillel's response satisfy his request? Why was he okay with it? And lastly, what in fact is the connection between the mitzvah ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha and the entire Torah, to the extent that the Torah was not given to Bnei Israel until they achieved a certain degree of unity of ke'ish echad belev echad. So we can probably explain this based on a concept that we find in many of our holy books, that every Jew possesses a unique portion of the Torah inside of him. We express this in our silent tefillot on Shabbat. What do we say on Shabbat? Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha, sanctify us with your mitzvot, v'ten chelkenu b'toratach. Give us our portion of your Torah. So to understand what this really implies, we have to look at the words of the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says, quoting the Gemara in Masechet Nida, that when the fetus is in the mother, in the uterus, melamdin oto et kol Torah kula, that a malach comes and teaches him the entire Torah. V'kevan sheba la'avir ha'olam, but when he is born, ba malach, a malach comes, an angel comes, ustaro al piv, and strikes him on his mouth, umeshakho kol Torah kula, causing him to forget the entire Torah. The Gemara tells us that inside the mother, the Jew is taught his unique portion of Torah that he is required to clarify and expand upon in this world. He's made to forget it. Why? So that he will merit to fulfill the task through engaging arduous Torah study. Now, once we understand this, it turns out that the completeness of the Torah depends on the unity of Klal Yisrael. Only then, because every Jew has a different portion. Every Jew has its own chelik. So therefore, only when there's unity amongst Klal Yisrael can all the portions of Torah be bound together as one. Conversely, chas v'shalom, if the people of Israel are divided and they lack unity and harmony, and therefore they cause a rift. There's a disconnect amongst the portions of the Torah. So therefore the Torah admonishes us, Torah achat u'mishpat echad yeh lachem. One Torah, one judgment will apply to you. Don't allow the portions of Torah to be split apart due to the divisions, due to rifts and fights and arguments between Jews. And this explains beautifully that the Torah was only given to Bnei Israel when they came together as a united body, because only then there was this harmony, this unity of all the portions of the Torah. So now the convert's request makes so much sense. The requests of Hillel and Shammai and their respective their responses, everything makes sense now. This convert was aware of the fact that every Jew has his own unique portion of Torah. So he went to Shammai and he said, listen, convert me on condition that you're going to teach me the entire Torah in its entirety while I'm standing here on one leg. He specifically says, Kol HaTorah Kula. I want to learn the entire Torah, all of the Torah, emphasizing that he wished to comprehend not only his portion of the Torah, but all of Bnei Israel's portions. What does Shammai do? He takes his stick and he pushes him away. He pushes him away forcefully. It's impossible for a person to attain all the portions of Torah. It can't be done. Every Jew only possesses his own unique portion that he received on Har Sinai. But when he presented the same request to Hillel, he was offered an amazing solution. What does Hillel tell him? Very simple. That which is distasteful to you, don't do to your fellow. In other words, fulfill the mitzvah ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love every Jew as if you are one mind, one body. And by doing so, it will be like you attained all of their portions of the Torah as well. And that's a deeper significance of the statement, Ke'ish echad belev echad. Like one man, one heart. When Bnei Israel are in total harmony and unity, they're like a single body with one heart and one mind. Every bit of knowledge and pleasure now spreads through the entire body. So that's why Hillel ended his statement, his expression to the convert, Ve'idach pirushahu zil gemor. The rest is just explanations. Go and learn. In other words, after you accept upon yourself, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, so that it will be considered as if you attained all of your fellow Jews' portions in the Torah, now it's incumbent upon you to reveal the meaning of your own personal portion of the Torah, the portion that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave specifically to you. Because you also have to contribute your portion to Klal Yisrael. That is the meaning of the mitzvah ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. That which is distasteful to you, don't do to your fellow. Just like it's distasteful to you if your fellow Jew is unwilling to share his portion of the Torah with you, in a similar fashion, you must share your portion of the Torah with all the rest of Klal Yisrael. And by doing so, it's as if you learned the entire Torah standing on one leg. Now, Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 disciples did not comprehend that every Jew has his own path in the Torah, and that each is equally valid and divinely ordained. They didn't understand that. And as a consequence, they failed to properly respect one another. And it was for that reason that they perished specifically during the days of Sefirat HaOmer, between Pesach and Shavuot, because these are the days that all of Bnei Israel must unite in preparation for receiving the Torah, just like at Har Sinai, Matan Torah, Vayichan Sham Yisrael, Bnei Israel encamped at Har Sinai as one man, one heart. This enabled them to receive the Torah its entirety on the holiday of Shavuot. I would like to tell you a story. This story is not a famous story. In fact, I only read this story the first time preparing for this class. In fact, by the time I'm finished reading the story, you're going to wonder why I even told you this story. But I hope by the end, explaining the story, you will see we will reinforce this message of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha and some lessons that we can walk out here after tonight's class. There is a story brought down in the glossary of one of the Perushim on the Gemara, the Mordechai, on Masechet Eruvin. It's told that HaKadosh Baruch Hu miraculously arranged an encounter between two of the great Tosafis, the Baalet Tosafot, two holy brothers, Rabbeinu Yaakov, which was known as Rabbeinu Tam, and Rabbeinu Shmuel, who was known as the Rashbam. These two rabbis, Rabbeinu Tam and the Rashbam, they were brothers. They were sons of Rabbi Meir, not Rabbi Meir Balanes. This is a Rabbi Meir who was the son-in-law of Rashi. Rashi, the famous commentator on Tanakh and Talmud. Rashi did not have any sons. Rashi only had daughters. His son-in-law was Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir's two sons, so Rashi's grandsons, were Rabbeinu Tam and the Rashbam, and amongst the other Balei Tosafot. These two individuals were monstrous in their Torah learning. They also wrote Perush on the Talmud. You have Rashi on one side and Tosafot. Often they argued with their grandfather. But the story takes place with these two grandsons of Rashi. The Rashbam was a very, very modest individual, so discreet, so quiet, so humble, that he typically always used to cast his eyes and gaze downward. And one day he intended to board a carriage, a wagon, and he was just with his head down and he started to board the wagon, but he didn't notice that the wagon was being pulled by a horse and a mule. We're going to see what the problem is soon. Miraculously, out of the blue, his brother, Rabbeinu Tam, appeared. And he told his brother, the Rashbam, he told him, Al tehi tzadik harbe, quoting a pasuk from Shlomo HaMelech. Do not be overly righteous. If you look up, my dear brother, you will see that a horse and mule are standing before you. And we learned that it's prohibited to harness a horse and a mule to a mule and a mule to a donkey, and therefore the Rashbam realized his mistake, came down from the wagon. Okay, that's the story. Now you're not walking out of here saying, oh my gosh, that was the most unbelievable story that you've ever heard, but let's elaborate a little bit on this story. There is a mitzvah in our Torah that says, Lo tacharosh beshor ubachamor yachdav. Do not plow using an ox and a donkey together. On a very simple level, the reason is because the ox pulls harder than the donkey. It's going to cause pain to the donkey. On a very, very simple level. There's much more deeper reasons to this. We're going to talk about some of them tonight. The rabbis deduce from this mitzvah that it's prohibited to unite two animals of different species, not just for plowing, but any form of labor, such as pulling a carriage. In fact, if you look at Shulchan Aruch Yoredea, he writes, Asur la'asot melacha bishne minin. It's prohibited to perform work with two species, kegon lacharosh, like to plow, velimshoch bekaron, or to pull a carriage, and the like. Ben she'echad tameh v'echad ta'or, whether one animal is impure, one is pure. Ben she'shneim temeim, whether they're both pure. Ben she'em teorim, or both impure, or both pure. It makes no difference. Not only that, we find another ruling that says that a wagon that is drawn by animals of different species, it's even prohibited to be a passenger, to ride in it, even if he's not driving. Why? Because the fact that he is riding in the wagon, that's the reason why they're pulling the wagon. And that's why it's prohibited for one to not only pull the wagon, but to drive in as well. So in this story that I mentioned, the horse and the mule are two species of impure animals included in the prohibition of do not plow using an ox and a donkey together. So it was prohibited for the Rashbam who wanted to ride in that carriage. It was prohibited to ride there, drawn by a horse and a mule. As the halacha states, he only intended to ride in the carriage, but his riding in the carriage created the need for the person driving it to create the need for the animals to pull with greater force. Miraculously, Baruch Hashem, the Rashbam did not get on that wagon because his brother, Rabbeinu Tam, happened to be there. And he prevented him from getting to the carriage and saved him from committing an Avera, in which he would have committed an Avera. So now, if you examine this story a little bit more closely to better understand the important lesson that this conveys. First of all, it is clear that Rabbeinu Tam and the Rashbam, two brothers, had two different, distinct ways of serving God. The holy Rashbam, like we said, typically walks with his eyes down, to prevent his eyes from seeing things that are prohibited. There are many, many great tzaddikim, even today, that look down. They don't look up. They don't want to look at things that they would regret, so they keep their eyes down. And by doing this, he continues to sanctify his eyes. On the other hand, his brother, Rabbeinu Tam, that chastised him and said, don't be overly righteous. He too believed that it's important to safeguard one's eyes, but it's also necessary to raise one's eyes to avoid violating a halachic ruling. If you keep your eyes down all the time, you're not going to know what's in front of you. Maybe what's in front of you is a transgression. In fact, they say that Rabbeinu Tam, his name was Yaakov, he possessed a spark, a nitzotz, from Yaakov Avinu. That's why he was called Rabbeinu Tam, because Yaakov Avinu was also called Tam. V'Yaakov ish Tam Yosef Oalim. Yaakov was an individual, if you look in the Torah, was constantly looking up and forward to see what was happening. Yaakov, the Torah says, when Esav was coming to greet Yaakov with his 400 men, it said, Vayisa Yaakov enav, vayar ve'ine Esav ba. Yaakov lifted up his eyes and he saw him. So similar in that, right? That same idea. Yaakov Avinu raised his eyes to protect himself from the wicked Esav. So too, Rabbeinu Tam, who's also Yaakov, his way of life was to look up to prevent himself from and protect himself from sin. The Rashbam, his brother, Rabbeinu Shmuel, found himself in a difficult predicament. He wanted to enter the carriage to travel to whatever destination, but he didn't look up. And because he didn't look up, he didn't notice that the carriage was drawn by a horse and a mule. But, so how does the Rashbam live life without looking up? How is he protected? So he bases his ideology on a pasuk in Sefer Shmuel, which was quoted by Hannah's prayer, which is Veraglei Chasidav Yishmor. Literally means he guards the steps of his devout ones. The Rashbam lived a life in a way that God miraculously arranged for his brother to protect him. If I'm a Hasid, if I know that I'm doing something right, even if I keep my eyes downwards, even if I'm not looking up, God will find a way to protect me and make sure that I don't sin. How did he do it in this story? He brought his brother. His brother was the protector. His brother came and said, hey, don't go up there. Don't you look up? Don't you see? To the Rashbam, this made perfect sense. In the words of the Mordechai, who's relaying the story, a nes happened. He arrived, a miracle happened. His brother arrived just in time to save the Rashbam from entering the carriage and transgressing the prohibition of kilayim. So, Rabbeinu Tam, he's looking at himself and he says, look at the opportunity I was just given. I prevented my brother from violating the lo ta'aseh, the prohibition of kilayim, of plowing or using two distinct species to pull a wagon. But he still felt it necessary to reprimand his brother. Don't be overly righteous. Look up. See that there's a horse and a mule standing in front of you. Now, the Mordechai who's quoting this story does not write what the Rashbam responded to his brother. It's very likely that just like he was careful with his eyes, he was probably careful with his mouth too. And maybe he chose not to respond in his embarrassment. But what we can surmise is that the Rashbam might have thought and replied the following. Maybe he wanted to say or did say to his brother, dear brother, Rabbeinu Tam, you think you are right, but this incident actually proves that my way of thinking is right. After all, God arranged for you to be here miraculously in order to spare me from violating a mitzvah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu approves of my behavior by not elevating my eyes, by keeping myself down. What are we to conclude from this story? Which of the two was right? Rabbeinu Tam thought that it's necessary to look up every so often to prevent ourselves from doing a sin. The Rashbam says, no, you look down because you don't want to look at prohibited sites. And don't worry, God's going to protect you. So who's right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged for the Rashbam to be spared from this prohibition through this miraculous appearance of his brother. He calls it a miracle. Now, God could have saved the Rashbam in many different ways, if you think about it. Another carriage could have come that could have been drawn by two kosher animals, and the Rashbam could have just boarded that carriage and went on his way. There could have been any other anonymous Jew that could have happened to be walking by, see the horse and the mule, and tell the Rashbam, "Hey, Rashbam, what are you doing? Don't go up. Don't you see it's a horse and a mule?" Why specifically the brother? Like, what's happening here? So God specifically saved the Rashbam by sudden appearance of his brother to teach us a valuable lesson. These brothers, Rabbeinu Tam and the Rashbam, were amongst the greatest scholars of their generation, like I said. They were of the greatest Tosafis. Not only did they teach members of their generation the ways of the Torah and best to serve Hashem, they also left an indelible imprint upon all of Klal Yisrael throughout all generations. Anybody that opens up a Gemara with Rashi's commentary, okay, you'll see Tosfot, which you'll encounter their explanations or clarifications countless times. Each one of these rabbis had a different way of serving God. And you can see that by the story that I just said. The Rashbam typically lowers his eyes to ensure that the Kedusha of his eyes is sustained. And Rabbeinu Tam, who was also concerned of the Kedusha of his eyes, but felt it was necessary to raise one's eyes to avoid any transgression. And each one had their own way of serving God. And God wanted to teach that both methodologies are correct. Both are divinely inspired. Each one's methodology was well intended. It was suited. That neshama, that specific neshama housed in each body. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated a certain scenario to highlight the difference between their approaches. On the one hand, Rabbeinu Tam saved his brother from riding in a carriage drawn by a horse and a mule, and that reinforced his belief that his methodology was correct, that it's imperative to occasionally look up in order not to violate a prohibition. And on the other hand, these sequence of events reinforced the Rashbam's belief that it's best to lower your eyes in all circumstances, because in merit of that, God's going to protect you anyways. So the concept both ways are proper and divinely inspired was revealed. Mishpetei Adonai emet tzadiku yachdav. David HaMelech writes, the judgments of Hashem are true, righteous altogether. This is the concept of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated this fascinating scenario to demonstrate this principle, that there are many proper ways to serve God, and they do not, I repeat, they do not negate each other. The Megale Amukot, which is one of the great divine Kabbalists, the author of the Megale Amukot, writes the rationale for the Torah's prohibition of plowing with an ox and a donkey. If you allow me to go a little bit deeper, and then we'll tie it all back. Yishmael, the arch nemesis of Yitzchak, represents the corruption and the tum'ah of his father Abraham's attribute of chesed. He is the evil shell, the klipa. He is the klipa's version of chesed. This klipa is known in Kabbalistic works as the donkey, as the chamor. Esav, who is the arch nemesis of Yaakov, Esav represents the corruption and tumah of his father's attribute of gvura, of din. He is the klipa's version of gvura, which is represented by the ox. These two klipot, these two negative evil forces, headed by Esav and by Yishmael, the ox and the donkey, are dangerous klipot because they are the leaders of the 70 nations of the world. The ministering angel of Esav stands in charge of 35 nations on the left side of the klipa, the side of strict judgment, gvura. And the ministering angel of Ishmael stands in charge of the other 35 nations on the right side of the klipa, the side of chesed. So the Torah prohibited joining them together. Lo tacharosh beshor ubachamor yachdav. Do not plow using an ox and a donkey together. Says the Megale Amukot, when you do so, a great danger exists when you unite these two forces. They are the root of all evil forces of tum'ah, of impurity, that are contained in the 70 nations of the world. The Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin famously writes, Pizur lareshaim hana'a laen v'hana'a leolam. That dispersal of the wicked is beneficial to them and beneficial to the world. Rashi explains, because the wicked are separated from each other, they cannot conspire to work with each other. They cannot assist each other in perpetrating evil. We've seen this concept in quite a few places. Khatam Sofer brings it down, Parashat Lech Lecha. He says that when there's unity in the realm of holiness, in the realm of Kedusha, it automatically causes a division amongst the Reshaim, amongst the evil. On the other hand, if God forbid there's a lack of unity within the realm of holiness, now the wicked join forces. They come together unified and in harmony. And he applies this idea to explain the dispute between the shepherds of Abraham and the shepherds of Lot in the Parashat Lech Lecha. He says that there was fighting. Vayiriv ben roeh miknei Abraham ben roeh miknei Lot. There was fighting between the shepherds of Abraham and Lot. What happened as a result? The Kenani v'Perizi az yoshev ba'aretz. The Kenani and the Perizi were dwelling in the land. This caused them to dwell in the land unified. The nations of the world were now stronger because Abraham and Lot were fighting with each other. The shepherds were fighting with each other. When there's a lack of unity and harmony that exists amongst the tzaddikim, chas v'shalom, it allows the reshaim to join together, which bodes evil for the world. But when they're coming together, it's beneficial for the world because then it separates the reshaim. Now, with all this, we can comprehend why God chose to spare the Rashbam from transgressing that sin of do not plow an ox and a donkey together, the prohibition of kilayim, by arranging a chance meeting between the two illustrious brothers, Rabbeinu Tam and the Rashbam. That encounter demonstrated that although they had different philosophies regarding how to serve God, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim, both are divinely inspired, both are correct. That the gathering of the tzaddikim together benefited them both and benefited the world at large. As a consequence, what happens? All the forces of evil were now prevented from joining forces. The ox and the donkey were kept apart. And that's why it was specifically the joint effort of these two brothers that result in the fulfillment of the mitzvah of do not plow with an ox and a donkey together. From all that has been said tonight, we can learn, Rabotai, a valuable lesson regarding the sacred service, the sacred avodah that is required of us throughout the year, and especially during the days of Sefirat HaOmer, the days when Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students perished for not properly respecting one another. It is absolutely imperative that we respect our fellow Jew. Ze klal gadol b'Torah, even when we disagree as to the best and proper way to observe the Torah and serve Hashem. There are so many different types of Jews in this world. So many different types. And each person has their own way to connect with God. You have the Yeshivish, the Litvaks, who are sitting there with their eyes in the Gemara constantly. You have the Sephardim who have so much kavod for their Chachamim and so much kavod for the Torah. You have the Hasidim who are so much about the soul and the heart and the Chesed. And then you have the Dati Tzioni who have this tremendous love for Eretz Yisrael and whatever, Torat Yisrael and everything. Everything is precious. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim. Never look down at someone else and say, your way of serving God is less than my way of serving God. You want to learn Gemara, and that's your way of serving Chazaku Baruch. You want to spend your days devoted to Tefillah, your time taking 30 minutes to pray Amidah, and your Shmona Esrei, because that's how you connect, and that's amazing. That's how you should connect. If your way to get closer to God is by learning books of ethics, Pirkei Avot, Musar, because you feel that that's what penetrates you, that's what gets inside of you, that's what changes you, then amazing. If for you it's through piyutim, it's through songs, it's through music, wonderful. if you're a story guy, if you're a biography guy, whatever it is. Not everyone has to be the Daf Yomi. Not everybody has to be the Tefillah guy. You still got to perform your mitzvot. You still have to pray. You still got to try to attend minyan. You still got to say your Shema. None of that is now obsolete. But everyone has their own way to serve God. Some people look down. Some people keep their eyes downwards and gaze down because they want to protect their eyes, and they don't want to ruin their thoughts like the Rashbam. And some people look up, like Rabbeinu Tam, like Yaakov, looking out and making sure that they're safe. Both of them are going to fulfill the same mitzvah because I'm connected to you and you're connected to me. I have my portion in the Torah. It's ten chelkenu betoratach. I have my own unique portion. You have your unique portion. I will learn from you and you will learn from me. There's nothing wrong with that. Ezu chacham alomed mikol adam. To understand, to be a chacham, to be someone wise, you have to be willing to learn from everybody else. I'm not an expert in Chassidut, but I will pick up a book and read what these great people have to say. Just like someone may learn something from me. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. When you maintain this ideology, when you realize that you are part of a klal, no pun intended, ze klal gadol b'Torah, when you are part of a whole, you are part of a general harmonious group of individuals, by maintaining that unity and that harmony within the realm of Kedushah, then you create a division amongst the Reshaim. When you're together as one, the Reshaim can't work together. The ox and the donkey, they're pushing aside. It's just not working. They're trying, but it's not happening. There's discord amongst the evil, about the 70 nations. And that is what's going to merit the complete Geula. It is now, during this time, during Sefirat HaOmer, we're a few weeks away from Chag Matan Torah, the holiday of Atzeret, the holiday of Chag Shavuot, where we wrapped ourselves around the mountain and we Vayichan Sham Yisrael, that we were there, Ke'ish Echad Belev Echad. We were like one man with one heart. We were all united. We all understood our mission, our own unique mission. We never looked down at someone else's mission. We understood that we were all there to serve one purpose, to serve God in our each own unique way. And Bezat Hashem, the quicker, the faster we understand that, the faster we can fulfill this precept, the sooner we will understand how true Rabbi Akiva's words were, that is Ze Klal Gadol B'Torah. This is what you need to know. Like Hillel said to that convert, this is what you need to know. Everything else is just commentary. Wishing you a wonderful night ahead.